It is finally that time. I am now getting around to making a top 10 melee list because a couple of weeks ago I did a top 10 warframes, a top 10 primaries, secondaries, and Karnan weapons, but I didn't make a list for melees. And a lot of you guys have been asking for one. But the reason that I didn't is because I was missing a few crucial key melees to a list like this that if I made it without them, it would be me just lying to you. But I have now acquired everything I need. And today, I'm going to show you the top 10 strongest melees in Warframe. And yeah, these ones, well, they're pretty good. I'm going to preface though, I'm not going to be using any kind of Warframe buffs for any of the melees in this video. The only things that I will be using besides any mods on the melee or their innate functionality is Arcane Strike for attack speed, and then Tenacious Bond for critical damage, and any priming a companion might do, which is best done from a Diriga or Hound. Things like Wrathful Advance, Roar, Shock Trooper, all of those make melees significantly stronger, and any dedicated melee build is absolutely going to be using one of those three, but this list is going to be the melees working entirely by themselves because I have so many videos using Roar or Wrathful or Shock, and I don't really just want to retread using Kalervo or Rhino for every single build. But if you are looking for anything with said buffs, like I said, I have a lot of videos, just go check them out. Things are pretty self-explanatory too if you want to figure out how to mod without them, but without any further ado, let us get into the top 10 melees in Warframe 2025. While this list is in no particular order, we are actually going to start with what is probably the strongest melee in the game, and that is the Nami Solo. This is one of the melees that I was missing a couple of weeks ago when I was first asked to make this video, but now that I have gotten it because it was recently in the Incarnan rotation, yeah, it is about as strong as everyone was saying it is. But base functionality wise, if we don't consider the Incarnan form, this melee isn't really anything special. It is just I think it's a one-handed sword or something like that. There's nothing too crazy here. And even unlike some of the other options that we have, the Incarnan form also doesn't do anything too unique. You reach 6x combo and then heavy attack to activate it, and you get greatly increased range, which let's not downplay just how good plus 3 meters of range is. That's absolutely ridiculous, especially when you can stack it with things like primed reach, which means that the Nami Solo has a final range of 8.5 meters, which is very, very high. More melee damage, sprint speed, and parkour velocity being appreciated. Evolution 2 increases our base damage by 80, which is pretty substantial, and also gives us on equip 30% more attack speed for 4 seconds. That would be more beneficial if it didn't have such a short duration. But the true bread and butter as to why Nami Solo is the best melee in the game is Lone Blade, which is on Evolution 3. This evo states that with your melee weapon equipped, you increase base follow through by 60%. Two things here. Melee weapon equipped means that you must actually have the melee in your hands. You can't have a secondary or a primary out and then press your melee key. You need to hold down your weapon swap button to equip the melee like that. As you just saw, there's a little like unsheathing noise. Once you do that though, you increase the follow through on this weapon by 60%. And if we look, the follow through is 70%. So increasing it to 60% would put it above 100. And that is incredibly important. Follow through is one of the more detrimental stats on most melees because it modifies the amount of damage that is dealt in a single strike each time an additional enemy is hit after the first. What this means is that if you hit one enemy for 100 damage, and then you also hit a second enemy with the exact same swing, the second enemy in this case would only take 70 damage, and then any subsequent enemies will take 70% of the 70 damage, and then 70% of what that 70% would be. And as you can see, it very quickly turns into the fourth or fifth enemy just not taking anywhere near as much damage as the first enemy. But increasing our follow through by 60% means that every enemy we hit is going to take the maximum amount of damage per swing. And don't underestimate just how much of a damage boost this is, because it gets pretty crazy. Bringing us up against a group of heavy gunners, obviously we are going to have to build up our combo, but once we do, we're already killing pretty good right now. But activating our Incarnan form, the melee already is going to start looking a hell of a lot better. But we are getting so many electric procs due to melee influence, and every single electric proc is going to be dealing the maximum amount of damage because we have that over 1.0 follow through. It just doesn't really get better from this. You're going to see that this looks a lot better even in mission 2 because we have really high range, and 1.0 follow through, it can't be beat. If you didn't know, all of the Warframes with exalted melees like Wukong or Baruch, they all have 1.0 follow through too, and this is the only melee besides them and the Ghoul Saw that can achieve it as well. And that is why I would say it is easily the best melee in the game, because having 1.0 follow through is better than having absurdly high crit chance or some really unique trait. It's just really good. Evolution wise, you can either use Versatile Creed or Absolute Dominion in the 4th tree. Versatile Creed is probably better for overall damage, increasing your status chance and crit chance by a substantial amount. But if you want to run Absolute Dominion, that also isn't a bad choice because 55% base status chance is absurdly high. I would especially recommend using this evolution if you are using Wrathful Advance, because then you don't need to worry about crit chance at all. But for a more general build, you're probably going to want to use Versatile Creed. You are going to see this mod set up on a lot of other melees in the game, and that is because melee influence is kind of going to dominate this list. Now, don't worry, don't click off the video. I have like 4 or 5 melees in here that don't use influence that definitely deserve to be on a top 10 list, but pretty much every melee that you want to just go into a mission and spam light attacks with is going to use influence because it just is way better than everything else. That's not a problem with this video, it's a problem with the game. This is a top 10 list. I'm going to obviously use the best things, and influence just happens to be that. Next up is the Harmony, and like I said, I have some non-melee influence weapons on this list, and Harmony is one of them. Bringing us back to our trusty group of corrupted heavy gunners, there is nothing too crazy at first glance with this sight. It is, just a scythe. But like most of the melees on this list, it is when we delve into the weapon and check out its unique trait that we will actually find what makes it so good. Harmonic Resonance states that heavy attacks condense all status effects that deal damage over time into a single instance, and then heavy attack kills activate Harmonic Resonance, a buff that increases status duration by 30% for you and allies. Simply put, this is Expedite Suffering in a melee, and that is absurdly strong. If you have any slash, heat, toxin, electricity, or gas on an enemy, it will just immediately condense all of the damage that they would deal into a single instance. Think of having 5 slash ticks that over their 6-second lifespan would each individually deal 100 damage. Now, instead of having to wait for that, you get an instant hit of 500 damage. And this is a very practical application on the Harmony, because Scythe melee attacks will force proc the slash status. Now, obviously, it is already getting condensed, so we can't really see it here, but you do see the slash number that I'm getting. And if we pair this with melee afflictions, it turns the Harmony into probably the highest damaging melee in the entire game. What melee afflictions does is state that enemies affected by status effects gain 6 additional stacks when they are knocked down or flung by melee attacks. If you remember earlier, I said that the heavy attack on Harmony will knock down enemies, and seeing as the heavy attack applies a single slash, this arcane will take that single slash and add 6 more to that, which Harmony will then use its unique trait to condense into 1 damage instance. I want you to see that I have no mods on right now. I won't even cut away. I'm just going to run back up to these enemies. With just afflictions and Harmony, we are doing that much damage to a 185 corrupted heavy gunner with 0 mods. There are no mods on this thing right now, and we could kill these people, albeit not in a timely fashion. But no mods with that kind of damage is pretty crazy. So when we actually do throw some mods on the weapon, well, here is what it looks like. You will just delete everything. Even Exodus units are not able to hide from this one. Sometimes your damage is so overwhelming that you will just cut right through their overguard. So in terms of melees that you want to build heavy attacks on, Harmony is probably the best one if it is in a slam weapon. In terms of modding, we are going with just primed pressure point because the goal is to one-tap enemies, so we're not really going to prime them here. Prime Smite Orkin is pretty important because melee afflictions will scale exponentially with faction damage and status damage. If you want a more in-depth look at how this arcane actually calculates damage, I have a whole section on it done by my friend in my Kalervo Perfected video, which is linked in the cards right now. TLDR, the arcane is absolutely broken, and like I said, has exponential scaling with smite mods and status damage mods. Galvanized Reflex will give us a lot of initial combo, which just serves as a multiplier to our heavy attack damage. Lasting Sting at first might seem like an odd choice, as this is pretty much the only melee in the game that you want to use it on, but it is one of the best mods for Harmony. When we add more status duration to a status like Slash, we are essentially increasing the damage that it does by making it last longer. Instead of 5 ticks of 100, with just this mod, it now becomes 11 ticks of 100, and that is over a damage double. And seeing as the weapon is going to condense all that damage into a single instance, having a higher status duration means more damage. Galvanized Steel for crit chance and crit damage, Organ Shatter for even more crit damage and heavy attack windup speed, Primed Reach to make the weapon have a significantly better time hitting enemies just a little bit farther away from you, and then Elementalist for status damage and more windup speed. Next up, we have the Thalos, which is one of the newer melees in the game, and probably one of my favorites. Double-handed scythes are very uncommon. I think the only other one that we have is it's the one from Zeraman that is the Hesbar. The only other one we have is the Hesbar, and it's pretty bad. But Thalos is actually pretty good. If we look at just the weapon's base stats, it is very competitive. 30% crit chance, 2.2 crit damage, 24% status, 300 total. This is a very, very good weapon. Also really high innate range. The follow-through of 40% is pretty bad, but the weapon's unique trait, or well, in Karnan form, does negate that some. Overall, Thalos is just a very effective weapon, and when we introduce the Incarnate form, we get more range and attack speed, which are probably the best things that an Incarnate form could add besides the passive attacks embed damaging shards and enemies. What the passive in question means is that while you are in Incarnate form, you can attack an enemy to embed a shard in them that will last for 15 seconds. This has a cap of 1 per enemy. As you can see, these enemies now have a shard in them. When you embed a shard in an enemy, it does no damage, but it will trigger all other existing shards to deal damage to the enemy that they are embedded in. Triggering these shards to deal damage has an infinite range and does not remove them, which means that you can continuously strike enemies to re-trigger them as long as they are alive. But when these shards do trigger on enemies, they deal 75% of Dallas's base damage to them. They do have a 0% crit and status chance with a 1x multi, but these are affected by flat bonuses, so things like Wrathful Advance, Tenacious Bond, all that stuff will affect them. Some of the best ways to boost their damage though is with the melee stance combo. If you were unaware, every single combo in a melee stance does have an individual multiplier, and this is carried over to the shards that are triggered by Thalos. You can also increase them with base damage boosts, but no IPS, elemental, or faction damage. It also does not work with any force triggers like Toxic Lash or Valence Formation, unfortunately. To run over the Evos really quickly, Dreadful Reach is the best one here because it gives us 2 more range and makes the Thalos one of the highest range melees in the game. And seeing as melees deal so much damage, having more range is probably the best way to increase KPM on them because you're already overkilling every enemy anyways. Echoes of Rage just means that we build our combo even quicker. We're going to just try and maintain that 12x though for the light melee influence spam. Vaulting Leap is some movement QOL with more jump and double jump height. And then Evolution 5 is where things actually get interesting because each of these evolutions is unique in what it does. But for the purposes of our build today, Explosive Growth is by far the best one. Stay stating that shards will grow whenever a new shard is created up to 3 times, and then fully grown shards erupt out from the embedded enemy, dealing 2 times damage and impaling them on the spot. To give an actual demonstration of this evolution, it is pretty simple. Just swing your melee, and then you will eventually just impale enemies that have these shards in them. This impalement will last for 5 seconds as the enemies are stunned in the air. They cannot be embedded with a new shard until this stun is over, and the damage that they deal is twice that of normal shards, but otherwise they work the exact same, except they are buffed by condition overload because this melee is just wildly inconsistent. Basically, the crowd control part of this evolution is worthless. We really only care about making these shards grow even bigger to get extra damage out of them. It just helps with a melee influence build. In terms of building the Thalos, like I said before, we are going with a melee influence build because the melee has such an absurdly high range of, at final, I think it is 10.8 meters because we get 2 more from the evolution 1, and then activating incarnate form is another 3, and that comes out to 5. So yeah, 10.8 meters of range, and it having competitive stats and a good 5th evolution just means that you can run around and be spamming light attacks and absolutely washing everything. This is, I believe, the exact same build as the one on Nami solo. So yeah, you're going to see this one a couple more times, but it is very effective. And when we bring it against some actual enemies, I know these guys are damaged a little bit, but the incarnate form providing even more attack speed is really nice because attack speed, like I said, is one of the best weapon buffs that you can get for a melee. And yeah, as melee influence weapons tend to be, it's just good. Having that high range just means that you will hit entire groups at the same time and just absolutely dumpster them. Pretty simple. Next up is the Praetos, and unlike every other melee on this list, this is the only one that isn't actually used for damage or anything of the sort. And that is because Praetos is one of the best QOL melees in the game due to its evolution 2 and 4 perks of Drifting Grace and Evolved Ascension. Drifting Grace adds 20% to your sprint and slide speed. Evolved Ascension adds 30% more parkour velocity to your Warframe. Do not underestimate just how big these benefits are. I'm going to demonstrate what a Warframe's movement looks like without the Praetos on. This is probably pretty standard. You'd be familiar with this if you don't use the Praetos because, you know, bullet jumps and rolls and all that stuff look like this. And they're good. But personally, unless I am playing a melee frame, I cannot play this game without the Praetos on, because the changes that it makes to movement are just too massive. Now look, we're already running a lot faster, our slides go a lot farther, but our bullet jumps are significantly better. Parkour velocity just increases the speed and distance that you will cover with certain maneuvers like bullet jumping or rolling, and your movement will take a pretty big step up once you use the Praetos. Like, you cover so much distance with this thing. And while it is a good melee for actually killing stuff, you genuinely do not need to actually have a build on it. I don't even know what the setup is. Don't look at it. Don't copy it. All you need to do is use Evolution 2 and 4 as Evolved Ascension and Drifting Grace, and your movement will become so much cleaner. And that is why I give it a spot in the top 10 melee list. If you want to go look, pretty much every video for the past 3 years that I have made where I do not have to use a melee for the setup, if it's like ability nuking or primary or secondary focused, the Praetos is there. You can't beat the utility this thing gives. You just can't. Slam weapons were hit with a pretty hefty nerf in the Tekrot Encore update, I believe, or it was Ileweaver, I don't really remember. But the Archititran is one of the only remaining slam weapons that can actually compete still, because even though the damage and AoE that they cover was massively nerfed if you don't jump up super high before slamming, the Archititran does so much damage that it just doesn't really matter. You guys know how slam builds work, you just jump up and then you slam the ground with a heavy attack, but the unique trait on the Titran states that melee kills grant the next slam attack plus 200 250% damage and 2 meters of range, stacking up to 5x, and then slam attacks supply the electric status effect. This unique trait pretty much negates every problem that a melee could ever have, because we get up to 1250% more damage from this one, and they lower the range that slam attacks have. But we get 10 more meters of range with this one. And also it applies guaranteed electric, which you know what that means, melee influence. And this has a better application that I will cover in a moment. Bringing us over to the actual build, I'm just going to be straight up with you guys. It is really, really good. You saw that 3.3 milli right there. I don't even have any slam capacitor stacks right now. And yeah, we're still absolutely deleting everything. And that's because these enemies are honestly quite weak. So if I bring in some Eximus units, which might be able to take it a little bit better. Yeah. But now that the electric dot kills them, in the top right, you will see that we are stacking slam capacitor. And that is very important, and why melee influence and the fact that the weapon force triggers electric is very strong, because raw damage kills with the slam do not stack slam capacitor. It needs to either be kills with the actual swing of the weapon, which you don't want to do, or it has to be a status effect kill, which will count the electric from melee influence. So with all of our slam capacitor stacks, I think that was 5.8 mil, and there might have been higher. I didn't see. And look, we barely need to even get off the ground to actually do this stuff. And you'll just delete everything. Architecturin is easily the best slam weapon in the game right now. Here's the build. It is a simple heavy attack build, prime pressure point for base damage, galvanized elementalist, and steel for crit chance, crit damage, status chance. You know what to expect by this point. Galvanized reflex will give us a lot of initial combos so that we get a multiplier to our heavy attacks, and then we are using shocking touch and focus energy to get us even more electric for the slam and the electric dot damage boost. Seismic wave is multiplicative slam damage, and then prime spider hurricane to double dip on the electric. Melee influence as usual. One thing I will note is that with any heavy attack weapon on your Warframe, if you want to use the ready steel aura, that is going to be a crazy damage boost, because this will add just one more tier of combo and take the 5 times damage multiplier to a 6 times damage multiplier. Another thing to note about any slam builds is that you should actually use the Naira mods on your Warframe, because these will provide a bonus that is additive to the seismic wave bonus but multiplicative with base damage. And even though they were nerfed to not apply twice, these mods are still really good for any slam builds. It doesn't really get more simple than this one. Just run around hitting your heavy attack slams and you will one-tap everything. The following section on the Zorus is going to be a little bit different, because it is a build on the Zorus that can also apply to what is the better glaive in the game, the Falcor, in some ways. The Falcor is sort of better than the Zorus, but the Zorus does have a higher range and is a lot easier to acquire, and the build on it is actually identical to the one you use on Falcor. So if you want the highest damaging glaive in the game, use the Falcor. But the Zorus is way easier to get, and even though it does a little bit less damage, it actually has a higher range, which makes it better for any low-level missions. But the Zorus is a glaive. You guys know how these ones work. You can throw them, you can melee attack with them, but if you throw them and then heavy attack midair, they will explode, and the Zorus has the biggest explosion radius of any glaive in the game. I'll bring these Eximus units back in here. Yeah, just hit all of them. And as you can see, it also force procs the electric status, which, as you can guess, means, yes, more melee influence. The next weapon isn't going to use influence, I promise, guys. But on the Zorus, there are actually 2 ways you can build it. Number one is the easier way. This probably looks pretty similar to the Architectron build, where you just have infinite 5x combo because of Galvanized Reflex, and then you go around spamming your 5x heavies. There's not really much to say about glaives. They're kind of really boring in my opinion, which is why I have kind of rolled all of them into one section right here. But you throw it above enemies, you detonate it, and they will just all die. Against some normal heavy gunners, and it should look even stronger. Actually, yeah. It's pretty crazy, but this is a very, very simple build. Yeah, they just got one tapped right there. There's nothing special about it. Melee influence just causes the forced electric on the heavy attack to spread to each and every enemy that you hit with it, which is why you see before they die that they have 20 electric procs, because I'm hitting every enemy, and then they are all spreading the electric. But there is a very unique build that you can use here to actually have an infinite 12x combo, and that has to do with the Zorus having a passive infinite combo duration. And this is the mod setup that you use. But in actual gameplay, here is how you will want to set up the 12x combo. Use the normal fire and just throw the Zorus a lot. You'll see that even without heavy attacking, our damage is already really good due to the volatile rebound mod. But after I stack this up all the way to 12x, which might take me a second, alright, now that I've hit 12x, when we throw our melee, it already kills pretty much everything without even needing to heavy attack. But as you can see right there, I did get a Tennokai activation. And this is very important, because the Zorus has infinite combo duration, so we will infinitely maintain this 12x, but also with Tennokai, it allows us to activate the glaive mid-air and benefit from the Tennokai not dropping all of our combo, but still getting a heavy attack. I honestly can't even showcase it against these enemies because they are too weak. We'll throw the glaive, get a heavy, and trigger it to one-tap everything. There is a really unique tech that you can use here too, where if you have the Zorus out by itself like I do right now, and then swap to a secondary, now you have your secondary and Zorus out, your Tennokai with Opportunities Reach, I believe, will become even more consistent. Instead of taking 4 attacks, it will only take 2. And it's really, really good. This one does require more setup, so you definitely don't want to use this in a quick mission, but it deletes everything. I do have to give full credit to Ninjace for being the person that I did get this infinite 12x build from. I did not come up with it myself, but I just found it on his Warframe page, so definitely props to him for this one. Either the 5x spam or the infinite 12x work though. Next up is a melee that I'm sure everyone was expecting to see on this list, the Okina Prime with its Incarnon. This is the quintessential melee influence light attack spam weapon in the game. It doesn't really get much better than this because the Okina is already an incredibly competitive weapon, and then when you add in melee influence and all the stuff that it does, well, it just gets even better. Evolutions wise, Synergist Surety for even more status damage, which is great on an influence build, or can reach for more range, and then Alchemy of War to increase status chance on the weapon by 12%. The actual Incarnate form does do something unique though. Kills generate spectral daggers that target enemies, applying max cold stacks. Basically, what this means is that the kills that I just got generated these daggers, which are hovering around me now, and if I get in range of some enemies, they will automatically home in on them and apply max cold, and then also deal damage in I believe, a 4-meter AoE, which will apply 1 cold to nearby enemies. There is a cap of 6 daggers you can have at once. The direct hits and explosions will benefit from base damage, while only the direct hits are benefited by condition overload, though it is multiplicative with base damage on them, and the statuses do trigger melee influence. The fact that they immediately freeze enemies, though, actually makes the Okina Prime one of the best weapons to use with Arcane Ice Storm, because that arcane has a trigger condition of freezing enemies, and Okina will do it for you passively. Don't forget that cold also increases your crit damage against enemies. But as you can see, the weapon is, simply put, just a press E and delete everything button. I didn't even have any damage numbers right there. Like, what the hell was that? So yeah, it is one of the best melee influence weapons in the game. I think it is second only to the Nami Solo, but honestly, for lower levels, the Okina probably is better anyways. And those daggers look really cool. Here's the build. You definitely haven't seen this one before, though I am actually missing a Tennokai mod. Mentor's Legacy, sure. I think I actually have my things organized wrong here, but yeah, it's very simple. I think we should come up with like a code name for what these melee influence builds are all called, because they are all literally the exact same mod setup. But let's move on from the Okina to the Dual Eker, and while the Dual Eker are another melee influence weapon, they have a unique trait which makes them a lot more fun. The Incarnate form on these melees states that kills create a toxin damage field, and if I bring us up against these enemies just to demonstrate what that means, once I actually get my combo up, activate Incarnate form, get some kills, and boom. We have toxin energy all over the battlefield, and if I bring some enemies in before they dissipate, you will see that, well, they actually kind of went away before they could do anything. But this is a hell of a lot more effective on Steel Path than it is in Mission, because these toxin fields will inherit some of these stats from the actual melee. They do have a 0% CC and a 1x critical damage, but their 4-meter range and 50% status chance means that they are a suitable way to prime enemies before you actually deal damage to them, and the damage they deal is respectable. It's nothing too crazy. You know, they're kind of tanking them down right there. Mainly the electric, but yeah. You can trigger more of it with the fields, and that is pretty powerful. You'll find that this weapon is best used with any Warframes that do have a force proc like Saren or Lavos, but by themselves they are still pretty good. Just having that passive triggering of statuses is very nice. And I like the Dual Ekers. They're a fun weapon. I literally just got them like a week ago, even though they've been out for like 3 years at this point or something. But yeah, fun melee, very simple. Works a lot better on the actual Steel Path, as you'll see in the gameplay. Like the Zorus and the Falcor, next up is actually going to be split between two melees, the Inodem and the Rakta Dark Dagger. And that is because both of them as daggers are very good, but the Inodem is the higher damage option, while the Rakta has a really unique passive trait that I wanted to point out, but let me explain why the Inodem is getting a place on this list. As a dagger, Inodem is just very good, and while this is another melee influence build, don't get too mad at me because it does do something unique, and it actually involves using another weapon, the Argonac. On the Argonac, there is an Amalgam mod, Amalgam Argonac Metal Auger, that states that damage from daggers reduces armor by 6. Now, this is incredibly strong and makes all daggers pretty much scale to level cap, because it allows them to armor strip with any of the damage that they deal. Let me bring these guys back out here. As I start to damage them, I'll get my melee influence active, and then you will see soon that they will lose all of their armor. Or, well, hopefully. The armor UI is bugged on a lot of enemies to just not show that it's armor stripping. But yeah, okay, you can see it going down now. But yeah, I don't know why it takes so long for it to kick in, but trust me, it is armor stripping, and if I didn't have all of my damage mods on, we would be getting to the point of full stripping them. Now you might be asking, these enemies have 2700 armor. How are we armor stripping so much of them if it only reduces it by 6 per hit? And that is because the armor strip from this mod does not work in the way that you would expect. Rather, it is targeting the armor that the enemies have at their base level, which means that these 185 corrupted heavy gunners, while they might have 2700 armor now, when they're like level 5, they have, I don't know, 300 armor. And that is a lot less. So when we come over to Inodem and mod on electric and use melee influence, which will inherit the properties of Amalgam Argonac Metal Auger, you have a melee that is going to armor strip every enemy that you are damaging it with passively, while also just being really good, because Inodem has an absurdly high base damage, and when actually brought up against these enemies, again, well, if I don't stop to attack, the damage that it does is pretty damn good. Now that I've activated Incarnon form, we get a lot more benefits too, because this is a Gen 1 Incarnon, and it is a very effective weapon that will scale to level cap when enemies get even more HP. They won't die as quickly to the melee influence spam, so you will actually need to armor strip them all the way, which the dagger will do passively. Evolutions wise, more attack speed, more finisher damage, not that you really care about that. This is an interesting trait, though it could be swapped for any of these other ones. I just find this one to be kind of fun if you do use it with the Incarnon Form's passive, where you can like jump up in the air and then throw daggers. Not that I really do it that often. And then the fifth trait is pretty useless, but the dagger itself is still very good. The reason that I bring up the Rakta is because while the build on it should be the exact same as the one on the Inodem, it has a unique trait of Mind Haste, where damage to enemies affected by radiation status effects will leech 5% of it as shields to your Warframe, and this will stack into overshields. Actual application would mean that once we get our influence active, if you look in the top right, we have maximum overshields, and we did armor strip every enemy there. Well, not every enemy, but most of them, because our damage is so low. Even though I only have 3 mods in the melee right now, melee influence is so broken. But if I unpause these enemies so that they actually damage me, they do have radiation on them, so they're actually not gonna damage me, but you get the point that I'm trying to make here. In mission, having an infinitely recharging shield just by meleeing enemies is very powerful. You can use the Amalgam Argonac and Rakta Dark Dagger combo on any Warframe to make them 1, be able to kill anything, and 2, not die. And that's kind of what you want to do in this game. So yeah, this is a very powerful combo. Inodem for more damage, but if you want the survivability that the Rakta provides, definitely use this one. Last but not least, we have the Hate, and rejoice everyone, this is a non-melee influence build because of melee influence. But anyways, the Hate is a scythe, and it is a pretty standard one. But when we actually get into the, let me unpause these guys, whoops. When we actually get into the incarnate form, come here everybody, now the weapon has a very unique trait where on either the forward combo or the neutral combo, you will launch forward these daggers that will explode to deal heat damage in a tiny AoE. And it has a very unique augment that makes the build that I'm showcasing right now possible. The Burning Hate augment states that when hate damages enemies afflicted with the heat status, they become vulnerable to 120% more status damage. This status damage is not additive with the bonus provided by Elementalist, or the one provided by Smite Orokin. Rather, it is multiplicative with both of them, working in the same way as Dante's Page Flight. The heat conditional here is also really easy to trigger because the incarnate form already has heat on the dagger explosions. So the goal of this build is to prime up a bunch of enemies with heat and then use our opportunities reach Tennokai to hit them with a massively damaged melee afflictions attack, because remember, this is a scythe just like the Harmony. So we are going to get 7 slash stacks per heavy attack swing with this weapon, and they are going to be buffed like crazy due to the Burning Hate augment and then all the other melee mods that we have going on here. Again, let's get our incarnate form activated. Hit these enemies, hit them with the heavy, and everything is going to die. Even without the heavy, the weapon does just so much damage. And melee afflictions is actually going to probably be triggering when we just get a, 7.7 milli right there, because we are knocking them down with a swing of the melee, and then melee afflictions is going to apply to all the heat that that enemy has too, and just deal a ton of damage. It's like pseudo AoE melee influence just without using influence, and that is a lot more fun to me. That does round out the list of top 10 melees in Warframe for 2025. I hope you enjoyed this one. It has been a long time coming, but to start off September with a massive video like this, well, I hope you enjoyed. I will see you all very soon. Thank you for watching. Peace.